Alrighty, welcome into the Dynasty Dumpster Fire podcast. This is your host, Tanner, or TK, and I'm solo today with the goal or plan of going through some of my Dynasty quarterback rankings. I was debating ranking all 32 quarterbacks, but then kind of decided that would take a little bit too long. So I kind of narrowed it down to around 20 or so um, that we're going to place into tiers based on what I think their value is at this current moment. I'll also discuss what I think their value could be in the future, what the risk is associated with them. And this is meant to not only kind of document the current state of the quarterback in the dynasty position, but also maybe to help some of you guys out there that might be heading into startup season or are currently in startups and need some help with where you should go in terms of the quarterback position. So in terms of my tier list, I've kind of broken it up into 6 different tiers of quarterback. The cool thing about tiers for anybody that might be new to that idea is that they can kind of go in any order that you want them to go within the tier. I'm going to place them in my actual order, 1 through 20. But, right, again, if they're in the same tier, an argument could definitely be made to move them around in the exact order that they should be in. So be sure to check out the YouTube video of this if you want to have the visuals of the specific tiers as I place the quarterbacks. But for those of you just listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, again, I'm going to use 6 different tiers, going from 1 at the top to 6 at the bottom. And again, this is going to be kind of associated with what I think their value would be if you were to want to purchase one of them or acquire one of them in one of your leagues. So at the top, we've got tier 1, which is 3+ first rounders. Then we've got tier 2, which I think is just around 3 firsts in value. Tier 3, which is 2+ first rounders. Tier 4, which is just 2 or less. Tier 5, which is 1 premium first, which is an early and mid to early first rounder. And then tier 6, I think is a late first. So you'd be able to maybe get one of these guys, or should be able to get one of these guys for a late first rounder in rookie pick value. Of course, this also goes without saying, but this could also be this could also be assets that are equivalent in value. So it isn't just first rounders. Okay, so starting out at the bottom, so I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up with number 20 in the last spot in tier 6, which is 1 late first rounder. I'm going to throw someone that I think has potential to jump up quite a bit in quarterback ranking if he does perform how I think he possibly will this upcoming season. And that's Kenny Pickett. So I'm going to put Kenny Pickett in tier 6 at my 20th ranking here. Kenny Pickett last season only started 13 games, but was able to kind of show a lot of improvement towards the latter part of the season. So he only finished with around 2,400 yards and 7 passing TDs, which isn't fantastic. But it's important to remember that he was thrust into the starting role in a pretty bad situation. I believe it was against Buffalo, his very first start. And he also didn't have the greatest weapons around him. Yes, he has a solid running back in Najee Harris. Yes, he has Deontay and then high draft capital receiver George Pickens. But that offensive line was terrible, and he was always having to seemingly scramble and kind of it was in panic mode a lot of the season because of the weakness in his offensive line. So in terms of the pros of what Kenny Pickett has to offer, he has solid draft capital, right? Was a first round pick in 2022 and 2021 and no, 2022, my apologies. And again, his team is much improved moving forward. So they did address the offensive line this offseason. Najee Harris should be coming back to full health. Calvin Austin, the drafted receiver last year that ended up being injured and not really seeing the field at all, is apparently having a pretty good summer so far. So I do think there's lots of room for improvement in terms of Kenny Pickett's overall value. Um, but along with that comes a lot of risk as well. If he has another season statistically, similar to what he had this season, he could plummet and end up in a situation where we see Mac Jones, down towards the very bottom of the uh, NFL in terms of overall quarterback ranking and in the dynasty scene as well. So moving forward to my 19th ranked player, staying in tier 6, I'm going to place Geno Smith. So Geno Smith had a huge breakout season last year, finished as the quarterback 5 in fantasy, which is extremely impressive considering he was a career backup to that point. He had about 4,282 passing yards and 30 passing touchdowns, and also, was heading towards that 400-yard mark on the ground as well. So he was overall pretty efficient in that Seattle offense. In terms of what Geno Smith has to offer and why I think he's a good quarterback to have on your dynasty team is, although he is 32 years old, so he's a little bit older, he is part of one of my favorite offenses in the league in terms of young power, star power, and potential in terms of what that offense has to offer. The drafting of JSN is going to help him. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett still has another year or two of production under his belt. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. There's lots of things to like in Seattle. He also just signed that 3-year deal, meaning that he probably has this upcoming season and another at the very least before Seattle would consider moving off of him. So again, a little older for Dynasty, but as your quarterback too, I think you could do a lot worse than Geno Smith. So we're staying in this tier. We've got 4 quarterbacks, I think, that belong in tier 6 in this late first rounder tier. And we're going to move to what everybody considers to be the kind of standard for what you want a quarterback to be on your dynasty team. And that will be Kirk Cousins. So Kirk Cousins, I'm going to place again ahead of Geno Smith and Kenny Pickett. Kirk Cousins, 34 years old, so he's getting a little up there in terms of his overall age. However, right, he did just have a quarterback 6 finish. He is part of or connected to the best wide receiver in the league to a lot of people, Justin Jefferson. That offense did just acquire Jordan Addison as well. We know how TJ Hawkinson performed last year. So there's lots of things to like in Minnesota. And last season, Kirk, as he generally does, eclipsed the 4,500 passing yard range, almost threw for 30 touchdowns. I think he was at 29. So he was consistent, and he was, again, just a consistent, steady, solid quarterback too, which is exactly what we've kind of come to expect from Kirk Cousins over the previous years in fantasy. In terms of question marks for Kirk Cousins, what is his future there, right? I believe this upcoming season is the last year of his deal. So what does that mean? Or do they move on? Do they extend him? What does that look like in terms of his future? So he may only have, 2 or 3 years of dynasty production, on your team. But again, those 2 or 3 years will end up being pretty solid. And I do expect him to at least land a bridge quarterback job elsewhere if he does end up moving out of Minnesota. So again, we're still in that. I believe if you need a quarterback too, a late first rounder is not the worst thing to throw at Kirk Cousins, or he's not the worst thing to throw a late first rounder at in terms of providing some stability and kind of upgrading your quarterback too if that's a position you're in. So the last guy that I have in this quarterback or this tier 6 for quarterbacks is going to be Jared Goff. Now, Jared Goff kind of had a career resurgence this past season in Detroit. He was the quarterback 10, so he did have a quarterback 1 finish, which is pretty impressive in terms of what he was able to do. 4,438 passing yards, 29 passing touchdowns. I like Detroit's offense. We all are kind of expecting them to make a jump to a playoff team this season. They almost were last year, right? We know they fell short at the very end after that big win streak. But he's part of this young ascending offense, kind of the same argument that a guy like Geno Smith has. However, Jared Goff's, significantly younger, about 4 years younger than Geno Smith. So I think he has some value there. He's also got 2 more years on his deal as well. So the Lions have been committed to Jared Goff. They've publicly stated, we like Jared Goff. We want to move forward with him. So, in terms of a dynasty quarterback too, again, I think he's a pretty good bet to be steady and consistent for at least another couple of years. Now, the Lions did draft Hendon Hooker in the third round this year. He's coming off of that ACL injury, so we're not expecting him to do anything in 2023. But there is potential that they do have him in mind as kind of the heir to the throne in Detroit, in the upcoming season. So there's something to think about there as well. But Jared Goff, attached to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, some tight end improvements were made. We know how good Detroit's offensive line is. Their defense took lots of strides last year as well. So I really like Jared Goff. And again, I think he belongs kind of firmly in this, 17 to 20 range in that tier 6 of dynasty quarterbacks. Alrighty, so we're going to move to tier 5 now, which I think is where we jump into guys that are worth a higher end first. That being mid to early or an asset equivalent in that range. And this one is kind of an interesting tier because there's some question marks here, but there are some things with some of these guys that are going to be in this tier that do kind of vault them above the tier 6 guys, in my opinion. So we're going to start first with Tua Tagovailoa. Tua is a very interesting case because he has everything going for him that you want in a premium dynasty quarterback. He's 25 years of age. He's on one of the better offenses in the league, has a good coaching situation, has great weapons around him. But the big question mark we have, right, with Tua is, can he stay healthy? What is his situation in terms of his concussions and his other various injuries that he's had? Because he's been pretty injury-ridden, even dating back into college. So that those question marks there kind of cause him to slide a little bit, in my opinion, in terms of his overall value. Now, he only played 13 games last season and finished as the quarterback 15. So, he was off to a hot start. That game against Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in the beginning of the season was one of the better games of the year, and he absolutely exploded. And that was, when his trajectory started ticking upwards, and it would eventually kind of hit a pitfall when he became injured and all of those, concussion concerns that we had started to pop up. But I think Tua has a chance, if you invest in him, to ascend if he was able to finish a full complete season here. So if he's able to get through the 2023 season and stay healthy and Miami is successful and he's able to kind of put together some streaks of games like he was able to last year, I think his value will jump up a tier or two up into the conversation of second or third round dynasty startup pick, whereas now I'm seeing him go in the 4th or even 5th round, which I think is a little bit low. So I think that makes Tua a gamble, but a worthy investment in the dynasty format as well. So moving on, staying in this tier 5, 1 premium first round area, I'm going to go ahead and throw in another kind of polarizing guy, but somebody that I think has lots of potential and has shown lots of improvement, especially this past season, would be Daniel Jones. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to put him ahead of Tua, which I think a lot of people might have question marks about. Daniel Jones is an interesting case because he has the draft capital, was an early first round pick. He was able to kind of jump into the quarterback 1 range this year as quarterback 9, but it wasn't as much due to him excelling as a passer as much as it was him being able to use his legs to make big plays. He had over 700 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns this past season, despite, and that allowed him to finish as the quarterback 9. Now, what do we like about Daniel Jones? Again, dual threat quarterbacks typically do well in fantasy. He is on a team that I believe is on the upward trajectory. The Giants couldn't have been much worse in terms of the weapons that were surrounding Daniel Jones last year. They brought in Darren Waller. They drafted Jalen Hyatt. There's lots of. They brought in Paris Campbell. So there's lots of improvement that was shown, or kind of, his weapons were improved, but he's got to, continue to improve and progress as a passer if he really wants to jump up past this current value. Right now, I think he's a great quarterback two to pick up in the fourth round of a startup. He's a great quarterback two with some potential for some quarterback one spike weeks in there. But again, the question marks of can he improve on his current value kind of cement him in this tier as a 14 to 16, 14 to 20 range dynasty quarterback, in my opinion. So I've got one more guy in this tier, and this is a guy who we've kind of been able to, similar to some of the guys in the lower tier, we've kind of accepted what he is and know kind of what his value is, what he provides, and what he can do on the field at this point. And that's Dak Prescott. So I'm going to throw Dak Prescott at the top of this tier. Dak Prescott, right? 29 years of age. So he's getting up there in terms of overall dynasty age, still not old by any means, but he's been pretty inconsistent throughout his time in the NFL, but most of that is due to injury. We know that he has, the potential in that Dallas offense to explode any given week with lots of the talent that surrounds him. Him and CeeDee Lamb built a pretty solid connection towards the second half of the 2023 season. And he has had 4 quarterback one starts in his time, dating back to 2016. So he has potential to jump up into that quarterback one conversation any given season, but he has to stay healthy, and he has to limit. And again, this has always been the concern with Dak. He has to limit his interceptions. He's always at the top of the league in terms of interceptions thrown. So those types of things kind of drag him down a little bit. We know what Dak is. He's pretty secure in his job. We don't see the Cowboys moving on from him in the near future. So again, if you're rolling with Dak as your quarterback one, I've got some concerns, but as a quarterback two, I don't think it gets much better than Dak. And you're able to grab him I've seen him slip to the end of the third round in a dynasty startup. And if you're starting in the top half of that draft and grabbing a guy like Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen or Mahomes, who we'll talk about later, and you're able to pair him with Dak as your quarterback two, I think that is a fantastic start, being able to grab him at that range. So I'm grabbing him everywhere I can in startups if he's falling that far. Alrighty, so that is the end of my tier 5, or my one premium first round of value tier. We're going to jump up into tier 4 now, where we start getting into more premium and elite assets, guys that are worth 2 firsts in value, guys that you're going to have to pay up a little bit to get. And this tier is also a tier that I think should be kind of called the unproven but high potential tier. So, I've got a couple of rookies in this tier that I think we know, have lots of things going for them, but have lots of question marks, seeing as that they haven't played in the NFL yet. And we're going to start off here with CJ Stroud at the back of this tier 4. CJ Stroud is somebody that I think is being a little bit undervalued in Dynasty right now. Again, I'm seeing him slip past lots of the other guys that I think, again, that you'll see are in this same tier. And I don't really know why. He has high investment from the Texans, right? He was a number 2 overall pick, right? They're invested in him. He's the best pure passer in this previous draft, and I don't think it's particularly close in my opinion. He does lack a little bit of rushing upside, or he did in college, although in that Georgia game last season, we did see that he is capable of running. So it'll be interesting to see how the Texans plan to deploy him, if they do plan to use his legs, or if he's going to kind of be one of those guys that sits in the pocket and picks teams off. But I think the thing that knocks him below the other 2 guys in this tier, in my opinion, is that his situation isn't fantastic. The Texans have historically not been a great place for quarterbacks or any young assets or young players to thrive and grow. Lots of instability in that program, or in that team, in terms of coaching and lack of weapons around him. And I think that's going to kind of hinder his development at first. When your wide receiver one is Nico Smith and Nico Collins, and your other next best target is Dalton Schultz. I think that's a little bit concerning as a young rookie quarterback that is in need of uh, you know solid weapons around him to be able to develop. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with CJ Stroud. I think he's a fine pick in the third round as your quarterback too. But again, with all rookie quarterbacks, there's a little bit of risk involved there as well. So jumping up ahead of him in the same tier, or moving on within the same tiers, I'm going to throw Anthony Richardson as my next quarterback in that tier 4. Anthony Richardson is fascinating in terms of his range of outcomes of what he can be. We know and everyone sees this, which is why he's being pushed up to the end of the first round in dynasty startups, which I think is a little bit high or a little bit rich for my taste. But we know what he can be, right? We see the potential of what he can be. He can turn into a Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson type of asset, where a game-breaking asset in fantasy, where he's able to rush for 1,000 yards and throw for 3,000 to 4,000 yards. If he can get to that point, then he will jump and ascend all the way up. He could potentially jump and ascend all the way up into that tier 2 or tier 1 range. Now, along with that, he also has the potential to completely fall flat and hurt a lot of teams that invested in him in the first or early second round, late first, early second round in a startup. He has the draft capital, he has the freak athleticism, but again, his lack of tape from college and his lack of experience, along with some of the passing efficiency concerns that some people had, or that are kind of pop up in his profile, make him a really risky investment, but somebody that could absolutely pay off if you have the fortitude to grab him or invest in him. So the last quarterback that I have in tier 4 here, as we're moving up into the top half of our tier list here, is going to be my personal favorite of the rookie quarterbacks from this upcoming or this past season, and that's going to be Bryce Young. So I think Bryce Young belongs above these other 2 rookie quarterbacks for a couple of different reasons. But most importantly, that I think his situation is the best out of the 3. And I think, again, as in his prospect profile, he was definitely seen as kind of a tier above these other 2 to lots of people. So the things we like about Bryce Young, his investment obviously is the highest it could possibly be. He's the number 1 overall pick, right? The Panthers gave up a lot to go get him. So I think that they're really invested in him and in developing him as a quarterback. And I think his situation is pretty solid in Carolina. I like Frank Reich. I think he's going to do a great job developing Bryce Young. I like what they've been able to build around him. Carolina's O-line is pretty underrated. Ike Ekwonu had a pretty good season towards the end there, and you've got some other talent there. They beefed up that O-line this offseason a little bit more as well. And I think that although he doesn't have any standout weapons around him, he does have lots of veterans with, solid experience that can kind of help mentor him, and guys that that will help him develop, like Miles Sanders and DJ Shark and Adam Thielen. He's got some talent there to kind of help him. I don't expect him to absolutely blow up and be fantasy viable this first season. I don't really expect that from any of these 3 guys, with the exception of Anthony Richardson, if he's able to do well passing. But again, long term, I do think Bryce Young, I do see him having a path to being slightly better than these other 2 in terms of his overall situation and what he could become. Now, the concerns about Bryce Young, his size, I don't really buy into that one as much, seeing as that, it's quarterbacks of any size get hurt. I don't really see that. He doesn't have an extensive injury history. He was able to stay healthy at Alabama for the most part. So that's not one of my biggest concerns, but it is for lots of people. So you may be able to buy him for a pretty good deal if you are, so inclined to do so. Alrighty, so that is the end of my tier 4. So we are now 10 quarterbacks into the list, and we're jumping up now into the primo kind of quarterback assets. We've got our top 10 here that we're going to finish up with. So this is going to be, again, be a top 20 list. As we kind of take an intermission here, I just want to say thank you for anybody that's listening or watching. I do appreciate any kind of support that I get here. If you could, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate the podcast, give it 5 stars or leave a review. That's very much appreciated. It kind of helps with promoting and growing the show. And if you're on YouTube, drop a like, hit subscribe, do all of the things that YouTubers ask people to do, because again, my goal is to kind of start really taking off and growing this thing to the point where I can get more guests on and kind of improve my production a little bit, because I have lots of goals and aspirations for this. But again, I need some, I count on support and need some support and feedback for growth. So again, thank you for anybody that tuned in, and I do appreciate it. All right, jumping into tier 3, which is the 2+ first rounder tier here. These are guys that you're going to have to pay up to get, because they are kind of the cream of, or we're starting to get to kind of the cream of the crop in terms of lack of question marks and youth and production all kind of bundled in together. Now, there are still some question marks in this tier, which is why they're a little bit below the other two, but we're starting to get into, again, guys that you really want to build your dynasty football team, fantasy football teams around. So we're going to start at the bottom of tier 3 with Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. So Kyler Murray is 25 years old and has historically, with the exception of this past season, finished as a quarterback 1 all of his previous seasons, all 3 of them. He was top 10 all 3 of his previous seasons. He was the quarterback 19 last season, despite only playing 11 games. Right, we know what happened with his injury and his ACL tear. But Kyler Murray has shown enough to me to be in this, premium top 10 of dynasty quarterback tier. He has the rushing upside. He's shown lots he's shown lots as a passer as well. Some people have some concerns with his passing and his decision making. There's some people, in the NFL sphere that have an issue with his attitude and the way that he carries himself. Regardless of all of that, I think that he is the best value overall in dynasty startups right now, where I'm seeing him go, and somebody that I would absolutely be buying if I am a rebuilder or somebody that's kind of punting this upcoming season, trying to acquire a high pick in 2024. Kyler is going anywhere from the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th in some of the startups and mocks that I'm seeing. And that is kind of egregious in my opinion. He didn't tear his Achilles. He isn't in legal trouble. He has an ACL tear. And although he may struggle this upcoming season a little bit for the first part of the season, and there are some concerns there, long term, I don't have any concerns with Kyler. If he's not with the Cardinals, someone will invest in him or someone will pick him up. He's shown enough. He has the draft capital. He is a guy that someone would be interested in. So again, I think he's a pretty safe bet as a quarterback 2. As a rebuilder, I would even be okay having him as your quarterback 1 if you want to invest and beef up your other positions in the first couple rounds of your startup. I would be okay with that move. If you don't have the expectation of competing in 2020 in this upcoming 2023 season. Alrighty, so moving into my number 9 pick here, I have a guy who is polarizing in the community, seeing as that people either love him or absolutely hate him, and I kind of fall somewhat in the middle here, and that's Justin Fields. So Justin Fields, 24 years old, a quarterback 7 season last year, but it came on the back of an insane amount of rushing, right? 1,100 plus rushing yards and 8 rushing TDs will always put you in the top 10, top 5 conversation in fantasy football. The concerns that lots of people have, myself included, are his passing efficiency and his ability as a passer. 2,200 yards last season and 17 passing touchdowns is not going to get any, real life NFL fan excited about Justin Fields. Yes, he'll make the splash plays. Yes, he'll break off 80-yard runs and take them to the house. But he's got to improve as a passer for me to feel comfortable investing in him long-term in Dynasty, right? If he expects to get a huge extension in 2 years or so, he's going to have to improve as a passer. Otherwise, it's extremely possible as early as next season that the Bears choose to move on from him. If they're bad again this year and they're at the top of the draft again, I don't see a situation where they are able to pass up on a quarterback like Drake May or Caleb Williams and continue to roll with Justin Fields because he hasn't shown that he can win. Now, his situation improved, right? The addition of DJ Moore is significant, right? He now has what some people will consider an alpha or solid wide receiver one, whereas last year he was throwing to Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney. So this is going to be a big test for Justin Fields, right? Is he going to be able to cement himself as the future of the Bears and show that he's worth investing in? It's a risk. So I'm personally avoiding Justin Fields at his value. I'm seeing him go as early as 1.6 or 7 in the first round. And I think that, of course, as you'll see with the guys that are coming up, I would take any of these guys ahead of Justin Fields for one reason or the other. Although, again, there are a couple of guys that I think are in the same tier as him. I don't feel like he's a great value. And a lot of times, I'm finding myself wanting to pass on him in that range. All right. So the last guy that I have in tier 3 is Deshaun Watson. So Deshaun Watson is only 27. He was a top 5 quarterback in 2018, 19, and 20. Not just quarterback 1, right? We're talking top 5 quarterback in fantasy. And I think people are forgetting just how good Deshaun Watson was. He now has a full offseason under his belt with the team where he's actually with the team. He's practicing with the team. He's in camp. He's doing all of the things that, he's able to look at the playbook. He's able to be more focused because all of the legal stuff seems to be behind him at this point. And I'm fully expecting a quarterback 1 finish from Deshaun Watson this upcoming season. If we don't get a quarterback 1 finish, then I'm a little more concerned. But I really don't see any reason that he should be being kind of pushed back as far as he is in some quarterback rankings. The Browns have improved big time in terms of their offensive weapons. You brought in Elijah Moore, right? There's a potential for D-Hop talks in terms of being brought into Cleveland as well. So there's lots of potential there. Amari Cooper had a great season last season, but he's just got to get back out there and show what we kind of, anybody that's been paying attention knows he can and should be. So if you're at the end of your startup in the first round, if you get a slot, 10, 11, or 12, I'm loving the strategy of grabbing an offensive skill player first, like CeeDee Lamb or Bijan or, one of those guys, Garrett Wilson maybe, and then pivoting to Deshaun Watson in the beginning of the second as your quarterback 1. I would feel perfectly comfortable doing that, and then building around him as a good asset or as a solid quarterback asset. Okay, so that's the end of tier 3. Now we're jumping into our top 7 and guys that I think are kind of the guys to have in Dynasty, the guys that I would be willing to leverage lots of draft capital for, lots of I would be able to be willing to trade up for them in a startup. These types of guys where we're looking at 3 firsts range, right? It's going to take to acquire them because they have all of the things that you want in a dynasty quarterback. So the first player in this tier at my number 7 quarterback, and again, in the tiers, feel free to move them around any way that you want. You may think that he belongs, ahead of some of the other guys that I have ahead of him. That's going to be Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is 23 years old and had a quarterback 8 finish last season. Trevor Lawrence was someone that was being faded too quickly this past, in the 2022 offseason because of his performance as a rookie. But we all know how bad Urban Meyer was as a coach. We all know the lack of weapons that he had around him and the overall situation were really bad. And I think that rookie season is almost one that you can kind of just throw out, because if you think of this past year as his true rookie season where he had support and weapons around him, I mean, if that was his actual rookie season, he would be up in, he's well deserving of being one of the top 5 quarterbacks in all of Dynasty. The thing that I think kind of keeps him from that range currently is we need to see it another time. We need to see that jump and improvement next season. But if he's able to do that, I think that, again, we may be talking about him in that tier 1 range pretty soon if he's able to kind of continue to do what he did last season. So he was, 4,100 plus passing yards and 25 passing TDs last year, had 5 rushing touchdowns as well, which was pretty promising. He was used in the rushing game a little bit, which kind of, increased his ceiling a little bit. We want to see him limit the interceptions, right? That was a concern a little bit last season. But he's part of one of the most exciting offenses in all of the NFL, right? People want pieces of this Jacksonville offense, myself included. So I think, investing in someone his age, his draft capital, his prospect profile, part of an offense that's ascending like that is definitely a worthy investment. He's well worth being a quarterback 1 in a dynasty team. If you have him as your quarterback 2, which I do in one of my bigger leagues, because I was able to acquire him pretty cheaply, you're in great shape. So I do think Trevor Lawrence is somebody that you want, you want to invest in big time. Okay. Alrighty. The next guy that I have in this tier here is going to be Justin Herbert. And I kind of debated having Lawrence over Herbert. I think the thing that gives Justin Herbert, so 25 years old, I think the thing that gives him the advantage slightly over Lawrence in this current time is that he has shown it a little bit more than Trevor Lawrence has. And again, he has been in the league longer, right? But before this past season where he was the quarterback 11, and we can get into why I think that occurred soon, he's a quarterback 1. He's been a quarterback 1 every year of his career, right? Starting all the way back to his rookie season and the following 2 seasons. His offensive coordinator last season kind of limited, and that offense kind of limited his ceiling, in my opinion. The way that offense was ran didn't allow for him to. There was no designed runs, right? The running of Herbert's running completely stopped. There was nothing on the ground last season. The big plays were limited because of the way that they were asking him to throw short yardage in the middle of the field quite a bit. So I think with the addition of Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator, I do expect him to throw a lot more this upcoming season, and us to start seeing some of those big splash, huge arm throws and these big designed or these big kind of breakaway runs that we saw before last season to kind of come back and crop back up again, which I think will again gives him potential to continue to ascend into the top 5 of dynasty quarterbacks if he's able to put it all together. He's pretty exciting, right? But again, we're kind of projecting at this point, but I think Justin Herbert is a premium dynasty quarterback. the Chargers improved with the drafting of Quentin Johnston, so another weapon around him as well. If his weapons can stay healthy, they brought back Austin Eckler. I do expect him to have a pretty big fantasy season and kind of a jump in value overall, or a jump in ranking, I should say, in the quarterback realm this upcoming season. All right, so we're getting into our top 5 here. If you're still with me, again, thanks for hanging out. I love talking about this stuff, and I plan to do one of these ranking videos for wide receiver and running back and tight end as well. So stick around and stay tuned for that. At the number 5 spot in tier 2, same tier. We're not jumping to tier 1 yet, but in my number 5 spot, ahead of Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert in this tier 2, I've got Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, people are too low on him, in my opinion. Like, I'm seeing him go all the way at the end of the first round, or all the way at the end of the first round in startups. And I think he should be going before any of the skill players. I think I would take him over Justin Jefferson. I would take him over Jamar Chase. I would take him over Bijan Robinson. And I don't know why he's falling so far. If he hadn't have gotten his extension and was still, arguing with the Ravens and was still expected to play on the tag, I would be a little more inclined to be concerned. And I was concerned about him as a manager of Lamar in a couple of different places leading up to that point. But once he signed that extension, I think, and seeing what the Ravens did this offseason, I think you got to be very excited about Lamar. 26 years old. I know we're heading on 3 years since he's been truly elite. I understand that he did have 2 injury-marred seasons these past 2 seasons. But if he can get back to some semblance of what he did in 2019, even if he's not to that level, that MVP season, if he can do that again, get back to something kind of close to that, I mean, you're talking about a guy that it was breaking fantasy football. His rushing upside is elite, best pure rushing quarterback in the NFL. I don't want to hear the argument that I think he's better than Fields. I think he's better than what Richardson will be. I think he just has, he just kind of has that he has the crown in terms of that ranking in this point in time. And his new offensive coordinator, right, I think is also going to help him quite a bit. He was stuck in a system before where there wasn't a lot of opportunities for big plays. He was expected to he wasn't given, there's lots of running. He wasn't given lots of opportunity to make some of the big plays that we know he can make. So I think with Todd Monken coming in, I think that there's going to be lots more passing. His weapons were improved, right? We know they added Zay Flowers, which I think is a pretty big deal. They brought in OBJ, so whatever he has left in the tank will certainly help Lamar. And we know how good Mark Andrews and saw, Bateman back healthy again. I think there's lots to like in this Ravens offense, and I think he's well deserving of being up there in the top 5 in the tier 2, 3 first rounder range. So the final quarterback that I have in tier 2 is going to be Joe Burrow. So Joe Burrow, I've seen some people have him up in tier 1 with the last 3 guys that I'm going to have up there. I'm not quite as bullish on Joe Burrow, although I do like him. I do think he has everything you want in a dynasty quarterback. 26 years old, just had a top 5 quarterback finish, quarterback 4 on the year, 4,500 plus passing yards, 36 TDs, 5 rushing touchdowns, which you really like to see. You didn't see him used in the rushing game as much leading up to the season, so that was nice to see. And I think that if that continues, that's going to be pretty nice in terms of raising his overall ceiling. But what you've got to love about Joe Burrow when compared to other guys in this tier is, of course, he's tied to Jamar Chase. They've made comments about trying to bring back T. Higgins as well. They brought in other guys around him, Hayden Hurst last year, Irv Smith this year. Tyler Boyd is still around. Joe Mixon is expected to be back. So I think that offense and how successful that it's been, kind of, you want a quarterback that's part of that system, and you want the quarterback that's leading that charge. So Joe Burrow, I love. We're expecting a pretty big deal to be signed pretty soon for him. I also expect that for Herbert as well. Um, so it'll be interesting to see, once he has that locked in, there's really no reason that I don't think, if he has another season like this past season, there's no reason I don't think he should be, or he shouldn't be viewed up in that tier 1 range, worth 3+ firsts. Alrighty, so we're going to jump into our final tier here, which is the absolute cream of the crop, tier 1, 3+ first rounders to acquire, basically almost untouchable at this point in terms of being able to get a hold of types of guys. And most people going into last season, 2 of these guys were in this tier, but I think the guy that I'm going to have at third definitely deserves being placed up in this first tier. Based on what he showed last season, based on his situation, based on all of the factors that come into play in terms of what we saw in terms of team investment and things of that nature, and that's going to be Jalen Hurts. So I have Jalen Hurts as my tier 3 quarterback number 3 quarterback in that tier 1. Jalen Hurts was quarterback 3 last season, right? So, and I think a lot of that came from his prowess as a rusher. He wasn't all that impressive in terms of total passing numbers, 3,700 yards, 22 TDs, but his 700 plus rushing yards and 13 TDs, if you can get similar production to that every season, and I do expect the TDs to drop down a little bit, some regression there, but if you can get numbers close to that, I mean, he'll be elite every season. I think for the 2023 season, I think Jalen Hurts is actually the quarterback 1. So in redraft leagues, I expect him to kind of finish, I would expect him to be taken, or I would take him as the overall quarterback 1. It's just hard until we see that next progression as a passer. I just don't think I can place him above these next 2 guys. But again, Jalen Hurts, if you can get a hold of him in a startup, or if you can trade, 3+ firsts for him in value, I see it as a very worthy investment with how good the Eagles were, how great the talent is around him, and just what he has as a dual threat quarterback, and the rushing, the way that they use him as a rusher on the goal line and in short yardage situations, allows for lots of elite opportunities. So at the second position here, and this guy was before this past season was a lot of people's quarterback 1, is Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a little bit older than Hurts, so I think Hurts has that advantage as a 24-year-old quarterback, where these next 2 guys are a little bit older at 27. But he was quarterback 2 last season, and is really has shown that you've got to give these quarterbacks a little bit of time to develop in the NFL, right? There's lots of question marks about him and doubt about him after his first 2 seasons, right? Too many interceptions, super inaccurate. But after that second season, he made that huge jump and has continued to improve. That offense was, in my opinion, for a period of the season last year, was the best offense in the NFL. And, Josh Allen just kind of does it all, right? 4,300 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns. Those passing touchdowns, I mean, if you're in a 6-point passing touchdown number or league, I mean, that's winning you. Those numbers are winning you weeks. Some weeks when he's throwing for 3-4 touchdowns. But the other thing that I think really is great for him as well is not only is he throwing at that rate and having that success as a thrower, but he also rushed for 700 plus rushing yards, right? 776, I believe, and 7 rushing touchdowns as well. So both of those kind of parts of his game vault him up into the absolute, league breaking range that you want as your kind of cornerstone quarterback in the NFL. We want to, continue to see, we want his weapons to stay solid around him, right? There's a little bit of, chatter about Stephon Diggs being unhappy with Allen and the situation in Buffalo. But as long as he has, solid enough weapons around him, I think he'll be firmly cemented in this range moving into, the near future, right? As we're playing Dynasty. Alrighty, and to no one's surprise, right, the final quarterback and final person in this list, in this top 20 list, is Patrick Mahomes. I don't need to say much about Patrick Mahomes. We all know how good he is. Just 27 years old, quarterback won last season, 2 Super Bowl wins with the Chiefs, threw for over 5,000 yards, 5,250, and 41 passing touchdowns. And that's all without having what many people would consider to any elite alpha wide receiver ones. People were concerned after I guess with Travis Kelce, but in terms of wide receiver options, people were concerned after Tyreek Hill left that we would see a dip in production from Patrick Mahomes. And I really don't think it matters who he has, right? He's that good where anyone around him and anyone that is able to kind of integrate themselves into that offense and the scheme that they run and the play calling that the Chiefs run, I think he'll kind of elevate them to be what he needs them to be. He's reliable, right? 6 straight top 7 finishes. I mean, there's not much else to say, but Mahomes should be untouchable in every league. He shouldn't even be acquirable. I don't have any shares of Mahomes. I am third in an upcoming startup, and by the grace of God, if he falls to me, I would be thrilled. I don't think he will. But again, if you have Mahomes, it would take everything to get him away from me. It should take everything to get him away from you, because he he almost could be in his own tier in terms of what he's able to provide as a passer, how stable his situation is, his age, his success as a real life NFL quarterback, right? 2 Super Bowls by age 27. He's got everything that you want out of a dynasty quarterback. All righty. So thanks again for listening. I do appreciate it, or watching, whatever platform you consume this on. If you have any, if you're on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you have any, any changes or different that you would make, or any differences that are in your rankings. And again, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you could just rate the podcast and, share it, do whatever you any kind of engagement is appreciated, whatever you decide to do. Again, stay tuned. I've got lots of things coming. Keep checking back. We'll do some more tier lists here. I'm going to continue our Dynasty 101 series that I started as my first episode. More trade shows coming, more mock drafts, startup analysis, all kinds of things coming. So again, thanks for checking out Dynasty Dumpster Fire. I am your host, Tanner or TK, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Appreciate it.